You think time should have healed this by now. That is what everyone believes, that time is the cure, that distance is the remedy, that if enough months or years accumulate between you and the thing you cannot stop thinking about, the thinking will eventually stop on its own. So why hasn't it? You know exactly what I am referring to. There is something in your past, a decision, a relationship, a moment, a betrayal, a missed turn, and it returns to you. Not every day, perhaps, but it returns. You replay it. You re-examine it. You find yourself standing in the middle of some ordinary moment, a drive, a shower, a sleepless hour, and suddenly you are back inside it again. And the strangest part is this. You have thought about it hundreds of times, maybe thousands, and yet it is no closer to resolution than the first day it happened. That is not how healing is supposed to work. Thinking about something, understanding something, revisiting something, these should produce resolution. They should lead somewhere. And yet here you are, still circling the same event, the same conversation, the same closed door. This is what I want to examine with you today. Not with advice, not with reassurance, but with a genuine attempt to understand what is actually happening inside the mind that cannot let go. Because I do not believe you are weak. I do not believe you are broken. I believe something far more specific and far more interesting is occurring. And once you understand the mechanism, you will see it not only in yourself, but in nearly every person you know. Let us begin with the thing people say most often about the past. Time heals everything. It sounds true. It has the feeling of wisdom. People say it at funerals, after breakups, after failures. They say it with genuine conviction. And for certain kinds of pain, the sharp, surface kind, time does do something. The sting fades, the daily interruption decreases. You stop thinking about it every hour, then every day, then less. But there is a category of pain that does not respond to time this way. You know the kind. You have seen it in others, even if you prefer not to see it in yourself. The woman who ended a relationship 15 years ago and still, in certain moods, finds herself returning to it in her mind, reconstructing conversations, wondering what would have happened differently. The man who made a professional decision at 40 that cost him something he cannot name, and who at 60 still replays the moment he chose one path instead of another. The person who was wronged by someone they trusted, a parent, a partner, a close friend, and who carries that injury not as a memory, but as something more like a companion. For these people, years have passed, decades sometimes, and the thing is still there. So the first question I want to ask is, if time were the healer, why didn't it work here? The answer, I believe, reveals something essential about how the mind actually operates, and it is not what most people assume. The mind does not store experiences the way a drawer stores objects. It does not simply file them away, label them finished and move on. The mind is always processing, always interpreting, always trying to close what feels open. And certain experiences, particular, emotionally charged, unresolved experiences, the mind refuses to close. Not because you are weak, not because you are obsessive, but because of a feature of mental architecture that every human being carries. There is a well-documented phenomenon in psychology, and I observed its outlines long before it was formally named, that describes how the mind treats incomplete experiences differently from complete ones. When something ends clearly, when a task is finished, when a story reaches its conclusion, the mind releases it, it files it, it moves on. But when something ends without resolution, when a relationship ends without understanding why, when a betrayal is never acknowledged, when a decision is made and the consequences are never fully processed, the mind does not file it. It keeps it active, it keeps it open. Think of it this way. Imagine a book you have been reading. You finish it, you close it, you set it aside and you do not think about it much again. But now imagine you are halfway through a book and someone takes it from you, without warning, without explanation, without the ending, and you never get it back. Which book do you think about more? The incomplete one. Always the incomplete one. This is not sentimentality. This is architecture. The mind assigns resources to unresolved things because unresolved things, from the perspective of the brain, are still problems requiring attention. They are open files. They demand cognitive space because the mind is still trying, still working, still searching for a resolution that has not yet arrived. And this is why you keep thinking about it. You believe you are remembering, but you are not really remembering. You are reprocessing. You are attempting, again and again, to complete something your mind registered as unfinished. The pain you feel when you revisit the memory is not nostalgia. It is not even grief, precisely. It is the sensation of the mind returning to work it has not yet completed. Now here is where it becomes more complicated and more honest. Why hasn't the reprocessing worked? If the mind keeps revisiting the experience in order to resolve it, why hasn't it resolved? You have thought about it hundreds of times. Why are you no closer? Because there is a crucial difference between thinking about something and actually processing it emotionally. Rumination, the kind of repetitive mental cycling that most people who can't let go experience, is not the same as resolution. In fact, it often prevents resolution. When you ruminate, you are not moving through the experience, you are circling it. You are rehearsing the same details, the same alternative scenarios, the same conclusions, but you are doing it from a protected distance. You are engaging with the event intellectually, while keeping the emotional center of it at arm's length. Think of the man who keeps replaying an argument with his father. He has replayed it 1,000 times. He has analyzed who was right, who was wrong, what was said, what should have been said. He has constructed 17 alternative versions of the conversation in his mind, and yet the thing still sits in his chest like a stone. Why? Because the replaying is not emotional processing. It is emotional avoidance disguised as engagement. The mind is clever in this way. It gives you the sensation of working on a problem, the sensation of thinking, analyzing, revisiting, while actually protecting you from the one thing that would genuinely move you through it, fully feeling what the experience cost you. You say you cannot let go. But in many cases, the more accurate truth is that you have never fully let yourself arrive at the experience emotionally. You have orbited it. You have examined it from every angle, but you have not sat inside it without defense. What you call attachment is often avoidance, and avoidance, paradoxically, is what keeps things alive. This is a mechanism I identified in my clinical work and have observed consistently across every variety of human suffering. What is repressed does not disappear. It persists. It circulates beneath the surface until it finds a way to express itself, through mood, through reaction, through dreams, through the inexplicable pull toward certain memories. The wound that is never faced does not heal. It simply goes underground. And underground, it continues to shape everything above it. But I want to go deeper than this, because we have not yet arrived at the most revealing part. Because here is a question worth asking. Why do some people hold on to the past, even when holding on causes them obvious suffering? Even when they know rationally that the event is over, that the person is gone, that the decision cannot be unmade. Even when they could, by all observable measures, simply choose to release attention from it. Why don't they? The usual explanation is that they cannot help it, that emotions are irrational, that pain is sticky, that the human heart does not respond to logic. And there is truth in that. But it is an incomplete explanation, because in many cases, more cases than people realize, holding on to the past is not a failure of will, it is a function. The past that someone cannot release is almost always doing something for them. It is serving a purpose. It is providing something the present cannot yet provide. And until that need is understood and addressed, no amount of time, no amount of intention will produce genuine release. Let me show you what I mean. Consider the person who was wronged, genuinely wronged. A betrayal, a breach of loyalty, an injustice. Years pass. The person continues to hold the injury close. They speak about it with a particular kind of energy. They rehearse it with an almost habitual clarity. Who did what? Who should have known better? What was owed and never delivered? Look at what the grievance is doing for them. It is organizing their understanding of the world. It is providing a narrative in which they are clearly positioned. They are the one who was wronged, which means they are the one who was right, which means they are the one who deserves something that was never given. This narrative is painful, yes, but it is also stable. It is coherent. It explains things. Now ask yourself, what happens if they release the grievance? The grievance is the explanation. Without it, the story of their life becomes harder to interpret. Questions arise that have no comfortable answer. Why did it happen? Becomes genuinely unanswerable, rather than answered by the simple formula, because they were wrong and I was the victim. Letting go of resentment in this case is not a simple emotional act. It is an existential restructuring. It means releasing not just the pain, but the entire organizing principle around which years of self-understanding have been constructed. And the mind, reasonably, resists this. This is something I observed again and again. The more time a person has spent building their sense of self around a particular past experience, the more dangerous the release of that experience feels. Because they are not just releasing a memory, they are potentially releasing themselves, or at least the version of themselves that has depended on that memory to make sense of things. If I let go, who am I without it? That is the unspoken question beneath most cases of prolonged attachment to the past. Most people do not hold on to the past. They build themselves around it. And here is where we encounter one of the most striking and underappreciated features of the human mind. Early in my work, I noticed that patients did not simply remember their painful experiences, they repeated them. Not always consciously, not always literally, but in patterns, in choices, in relationships, in emotional reactions. They circled back to the same dynamics again and again, as if drawn by an invisible force. A woman raised by an emotionally unavailable parent repeatedly found herself drawn to unavailable partners. A man who experienced humiliation in early professional life continued decades later to arrange situations in which he could prove his competence, but arranged them in ways that made genuine success difficult. A person who experienced early abandonment continued to preemptively abandon relationships before anyone could leave. This is not coincidence. It is not bad luck. It is the mind, specifically the unconscious, attempting to return to unresolved territory in the hope of finally resolving it. You return to the past not merely to suffer. You return because something in you is still trying to solve it. The mind behaves in this regard like a scientist who failed an experiment. The natural impulse is not to walk away. The natural impulse is to run the experiment again, to adjust the variables, to try a different approach, to find this time the result that was missing. This is why certain people repeat the same relationship dynamics across multiple partnerships. They are not simply unlucky, and they are not simply self-destructive. They are, at the level of unconscious motivation, running the same experiment, hoping that this time, with this person, with this set of circumstances, the unresolved original situation will finally find its resolution. It rarely does. Because the new situation is not the original situation. The variables are different. The person in front of them is different. The experiment cannot replicate the original conditions closely enough to produce the missing resolution. But the mind keeps trying. And this is the source of tremendous suffering that most people never quite understand in themselves. They see the pattern from outside, the repeated relationship failures, the same argument with different partners, the same professional self-sabotage, and they think, why do I keep doing this? Am I broken? The answer is no. They are human. They are doing what minds do when they encounter something unresolved. they repeat it, but repetition is not resolution. Now let me address one of the most commonly held beliefs about the past, because it is also one of the most persistently misleading. People believe that thinking about something, really thinking about it, examining it from every angle, will eventually produce understanding, and that understanding will produce release. I just need to understand why it happened. If I could only make sense of it. Once I figure out what I did wrong, I'll be able to move on. This seems reasonable, and partial understanding is valuable. But there is a category of past experience that the mind cannot think its way out of, because the obstacle is not intellectual. Consider what happens when a person believes something should not have happened, when reality contradicts their deep expectation of how things were supposed to go. The mind encounters a kind of friction here that is genuinely difficult to resolve through analysis. You made a decision at a crucial moment. It led to an outcome you never wanted. You replay the decision. You examine every factor. You reconstruct the moment. And somewhere in this reconstruction is an unspoken demand. This should not have happened this way. I should have chosen differently. Or they should have behaved differently. Or circumstances should have aligned differently. And the mind circles this demand, this should, endlessly, because the should is impossible. The event happened as it happened. The ending is fixed. The past is the one thing in the universe that genuinely cannot be altered. But the mind, remarkably, does not easily accept this. The mind generates alternatives. What if I had said something different? What if I had left earlier, stayed longer, chosen the other path? It runs these simulations not as an intellectual exercise, but as an emotional one, as if finding the right alternative, the right hypothetical, will somehow provide the release that the actual outcome has refused to provide. You are trying to rewrite a story that has already been written, and you cannot stop because the ending is wrong, because it doesn't make sense the way you need it to make sense, because something was owed that was never delivered. Justice, acknowledgement, a different outcome, an explanation, and the account is still open. Think of it as a mental courtroom. The case has technically ended, the verdict was rendered, but you are still in the building, still rehearsing arguments, still calling witnesses, still presenting evidence, because the verdict was wrong, because the verdict failed to account for something important, because the verdict left something undecided that should have been decided. And you cannot leave the courtroom because in the courtroom, the case is still open. And as long as it is open, there is still a chance, some part of you believes, that justice will arrive. This is not irrational. It is a deeply human response to injustice and incompleteness. But it is also a source of profound suffering, because the courtroom exists only in the mind, and the real case has long since closed. Now I want to address something that complicates everything I have said so far, because the picture would be incomplete without it. We have talked about how painful memories persist, how unresolved loops keep the mind tethered to the past, how identity attaches itself to old experiences in ways that make release feel dangerous. But there is another layer beneath this, a layer that is perhaps the most honest and the most uncomfortable. Some people do not truly want to let go, not consciously. They believe they want to. They say they want to. They may even be genuinely suffering under the weight of what they carry. And yet, if you examine the function that the past is serving, you begin to see that releasing it would cost them something they are not yet prepared to pay. Consider the person who holds their suffering as a kind of evidence, evidence of what they endured, evidence of the severity of what was done to them, evidence that their pain was real and significant. If they release the suffering, truly release it, not just say they have, they may fear that the original wound will be retroactively diminished, that letting go means, in some emotional logic, that it didn't really matter, that they are conceding something. If I move on, it means what happened to me wasn't serious enough to hold on to. This is the hidden calculus that runs beneath so much prolonged grievance and unresolved pain. The past is being held not only because it hurts, but because releasing it feels like a kind of surrender, a concession that what was done was acceptable, or that the person who caused the harm does not owe anything anymore, or that the years spent suffering were, in retrospect, unnecessary. And so the pain is preserved, unconsciously, protectively, as a form of testimony. The suffering becomes proof, and proof, once it is established as identity, is very difficult to release. Here is what all of this converges on, and what I believe is the clearest answer to the question this video began with. You cannot let go of the past, not truly, not durably, by simply deciding to let go. You cannot let go by telling yourself it is time, or by reminding yourself that the event is over, or by listing reasons why holding on is harmful. These things may help at the surface level. They may reduce the frequency of conscious rumination, but they do not touch the mechanism. They do not close the open file. They do not acknowledge the unfinished emotional business. They do not dissolve the identity structure built around the experience. They do not address the function that the past is serving. Real release, genuine emotional movement, requires something more specific and more honest than the passage of time. It requires that the emotion at the center of the experience be actually felt, rather than endlessly analyzed. It requires that the unresolved question, what did this mean? Why did this happen? What do I do with the fact that it cannot be undone? Be faced directly rather than circled. It requires that the person examine, honestly, what the past is providing them, what it protects, what it explains, what it preserves, and decide whether those provisions are worth the price being paid. And perhaps most importantly, it requires a very specific kind of honesty, the acknowledgement that closure is not given from the outside. It is not delivered by an apology, or by an explanation, or by justice finally arriving. It is not provided by the person who caused the harm, and it is not produced by time. Closure is constructed from within, by a decision, not to forget, not to minimize, not to pretend the wound was not real, but to stop organizing one's present life around a past that cannot be changed. This is not a comfortable thing to hear. It places the responsibility in an uncomfortable location. It suggests that the person waiting for the external resolution, the apology, the acknowledgement, the reversal of the outcome, may be waiting for something that will never come. And that waiting, however justified the original injury, is a form of imprisonment they are administering to themselves. The past does not linger by accident. The past that persists is almost always a past that contains something unaddressed, something that was felt but not processed, something that was survived but not understood, something that became identity before it could be grieved. An unresolved past becomes a permanent present. That is the mechanism, and it operates without malice, without intention, without your awareness. The mind is not punishing you by returning to what hurts. It is trying to finish what was never finished. It is trying to resolve what the circumstances never allowed to be resolved. It is doing what minds do, seeking completion, seeking understanding, seeking the closing of what remains open. The question is not whether this is happening. The question is whether you are willing to help it finish, not by thinking harder, not by analyzing more carefully, not by running the same experiment in the hope of a different result, but by finally facing, with honesty and without defense, what the experience actually cost you. Not what it should have cost, not what it cost others, not what it theoretically represented, what it cost you, specifically, personally, emotionally, in the currency of actual human experience. Because what you have not yet fully faced, you cannot release. And what you cannot release remains not behind you. It remains inside you.